My passion for the past 6 years has been helping creative individuals and teams actually create something. There's that famous Edison quote that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And it's that 99% part that I'm just fascinated by. The sad reality, of course, is that most ideas never happen. Now, some ideas should never happen. Of course, we've all walked out of a movie and thought, how the heck did that get made, right? But even the greatest ideas suffer horrible odds. And here's a little bit of thought as to why that is. At the point of a new idea, when the inspiration strikes, and we've heard a lot about that today already, energy and excitement is extremely high. It's at this moment that you're willing to stay up at night, working on that novel or writing the first chapter, or drafting a business plan until 3 in the morning, having conference calls and meetings. The energy and excitement is extremely high. But then, of course, as days and weeks pass and you're pursuing this creative project, you just start to kind of, realize that you've fallen behind in that television show you're watching. You're falling behind. All the emails are piling up in your inbox. You've entered what I've come to call the project plateau. And this is really the area that's sort of littered with the carcasses of dead ideas from past, right? There's no end in sight. There's more work to be done. And the gravitational force of operations is pulling you away from the idea itself, from the project you're working on. So what do we do with this gift of creativity that we have? We want to return to the energy and excitement, the high that associates itself with a new idea. What do? We just come up with another idea. And this process repeats itself again and again and again. And this is probably why there are more half-written novels in the world than there are novels. Now, of course, what we want to do is we want to transcend this, right? We want to push an idea to completion. And so the question is, what's involved in doing that? And so these are the obstacles that we're facing, right? The idea-to-idea syndrome, this sort of sickness, the double-edged sword of creativity itself. I mean, there's some other obstacles that we face, this lack of feeling organized. When we go and we ask creative individuals, how organized do you feel you are? And we look at some of the data that we get back, only 7% say they feel very organized. Double that number say they live a life of quote-unquote utter chaos. And then if you take sort of the vast majority, people are really struggling with organization. It's an obstacle that we face. A lack of accountability. You keep an idea to yourself until you're really ready to share it, and so no one holds you accountable to it. This is something that's plaguing the creative world. A lack of leadership capability. Why do so many bands, break up? Why are creative teams so hard to keep together? In advertising agencies, where they have this revolving door syndrome, this problem with attrition. These are all the things that get in the way of, you have to keep a creative team together for the long term in order to make an idea actually happen and survive that project plateau. Disorganized and isolated networks. This is another problem. People are not thinking about themselves professionally, oftentimes in the creative industry, and building their networks. How do some people and teams consistently defy the odds again and again? That's what I've been very, very interested in and what I wanted to speak about briefly today. If there were an equation for making ideas happen, this is what I think it would be. There'd be the creativity and the ideas part, which is not what we're going to talk about right now. Then there are other 3 parts. The first is organization execution. How do we manage our day, our energy, our calendars, our meetings? We're going to talk a little bit about that. The second piece is the communal forces, the role that community plays in gaining traction around our ideas. Community being our teams, our clients, our customers, our industry, society. These are all different sort of levels or auras of community that we need to tap into to make sure that we're harnessing the forces from them and that they're aware of what we're doing. And then the last piece here is leadership capabilities. How do we lead a creative pursuit to the finish line? So jumping straight in, I want to talk about something that I think we're all suffering with these days, which is, I call it reactionary workflow. At this given moment, we are being inundated with stuff. We are getting voicemails, text messages, emails, Facebook messages, Twitter messages, LinkedIn, all this stuff is coming into us. We're living a life where we're pecking away at the collective inboxes around us. We're trying to stay afloat. We're reacting rather than being proactive with our energy and what matters most to us. And so this is one of the things. Now, what are people doing? Some of the folks that I've met use windows of non-stimulation in their day to be able to, for 2 or 3 hours at a time, shut all of this stuff down and think deeply, do the reading, do the research that they feel is required for those long-term projects to push them forward, to make progress. Because again, that gravitational force of operations pulls us away as soon as that energy and excitement starts to dwindle with a new idea. I was talking to another guy the other day who was telling me that when he drove to work every morning, this was his 15 minutes that he was forced to just think about things. you know? And then he just got a new car, and he has an iPhone integration. He has like Twitter on his dashboard, and boom, you know, that forced period of time is gone. I would venture to say that the final frontier of deep thinking is the shower, you know? And now they have shower media centers, and we're being inundated with stuff even in the shower. And so it's very important that we make sure that we overcome reactionary workflow and we create space for deep thinking to push projects forward, to think about them. I want you to leave today with knowing that it's very important we spend energy on how we organize. To make this point very clear, you can look at this equation. Creativity times organization equals the impact that we make with our ideas. And with simple math, we see a very controversial idea, which is maybe if we spend a little less emphasis on searching for the best idea and a little more emphasis on how we're organized with that idea, we're going to make more of an impact. Anyone ever hear of the artist Thomas Kincaid, with a gallery with every resort town in America? You know, universally despised by art critics, I would say. But nevertheless, you know, this is someone who consistently produces. James Patterson writes 7 novels at once, has written more best-selling books than Random House has published books combined. This is someone who really gets the organization part. Organization is a competitive advantage in the creative world. And look no further than, you know, this is an example. There's a magazine that comes out every quarter. And once a year, it's called Supply Chain Management. Once a year, they have the list of the most organized companies on the planet based on their supply chain management strategies. What companies are always on this list? I hear UPS and FedEx, Walmart, some of these companies. Interestingly enough, for the past 3 years, in the top 3 spots, and last year, number 1, is this company. Apple is known for what? Creativity, ideas. Yet here's a company where they're arguably the most organized company in the world. And maybe that's what's behind all those ideas that are actually seeing the light of day. Organization is a competitive advantage. So how are people organizing? Well, I was trying to find the silver bullet, right? The perfect project management approach or whatever. I didn't find it. What I found was that a lot of these folks, these people and teams in the creative world that consistently make ideas happen, they live and work with a bias towards action. They're constantly looking for things that start with verbs, and they've pretty much declared bankruptcy on the stuff that doesn't. They're just trying to capture and execute things consistently throughout the day. They're looking for those action steps, and then what they're doing is in meetings, they're measuring the value of meetings with action steps. And when they leave congregated groups of people, or the meeting just because it's Monday, and they leave with nothing actionable, they question whether the meeting should happen at all. A lot of teams that I'm meeting with, oftentimes they'll just have standing meetings. If you have to meet just because it's Monday, make it a standing meeting where you stand and your knees get a little weak, and if someone's commentating rather than content making, you know, you call an end to it. So there are ways that we can make sure that we measure the value of meetings and with our time and make sure that they're actionable. Having a culture where there's this bias towards action is really important. If you say, Scott, I want you to follow up on something, and I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that. But you don't see my pen move. Can you say, hey, did you capture that? Because oftentimes that's the difference between a bottleneck later on. Can you, at the end of a meeting, simply go around for 2 or 3 minutes, and each person says, you know, I'm going to follow up with this, I'm going to call so-and-so, I'm going to read you this. Those are the action steps, right? If you do that, 1 of 3 things will happen, right? I will say, and then you'll say, wait, Scott, I thought you were going to do that. I'll be like, oh, yes, and I'll capture it. We just prevented having to meet 2 weeks later to figure out who didn't do what. Sometimes I'll say something, and you'll say, I thought I was going to do that. A duplicative action step, which would have also caused confusion. But what always happens is that accountability goes up. When you say it out loud, this is what I'm going to be doing. And this is the type of stuff we need to do in creative environments when we have ideas that we're trying to push forward over time. I also noticed, it was very interesting to me in these teams, that they really surrounded themselves with progress. You know, it's interesting, there's this $80 billion industry called advertising that uses the power of design and great copy. And these are just used to make us buy things and to do things. They're used to affect our behavior. Why aren't we using these same sorts of efforts for ourselves? Why aren't we actually creating billboards for ourselves to get ourselves to do things and take action? So surrounding ourselves with this stuff, progress begets progress. There's no doubt about it. Now moving on to community forces. It was very interesting when I was going around interviewing a lot of people in the creative world. I was trying to classify them as either a doer, a dreamer, or an incrementalist. Now, a dreamer's tendency is to always say, well, maybe we can do this, and maybe we can do that. And they're always going on to the next thing. That's what they go to bed thinking is, what can I do new? What can I add to it? Even 3 days before execution, they're saying, wait, maybe we can do this. That's what gets the dreamer going. Then you have the doer. The doer is sort of like the Debbie Downer of the world. The doer is always thinking, wait, can't do that because of this, no budget, timeline. The doer goes to bed at night just so happy that there's nothing new in the pipeline, no surprises. Everything is as it was planned, right? Then you have the incrementalist. The incrementalist has this innate ability to go from dreamer mode to doer mode to dreamer mode to doer mode. And you might say, gosh, that's the holy grail. The problem is they create too many darn things, and none of them ever scale. And the point being that whether you identify as a dreamer, a doer, or an incrementalist, you need to surround yourself with people who always balance you out at any given moment in the progression of what mode you're in at the moment. We need to make sure that these people around us know what we're doing. We need to share ideas liberally. A lot of you know Chris Anderson, not the TED Chris Anderson, but the editor-in-chief of Wired magazine, very prolific author and entrepreneur. Every time he has an idea, he throws it up on his blog. I hear he has an internal blog at Wired. He has an external blog. He just throws it out there. Sometimes people ignore it. They just move on. Sometimes they really agree or they disagree. Oftentimes, since he's sort of a dreamer, he'll move on to something else, and his community will say, hey, whatever happened to that? Did you get the book deal? Are you going to give us an update on this? He relies on the community to keep him accountable. Now, of course, I asked him, Chris, aren't you worried that people are going to steal your ideas? And first of all, he said, listen, most ideas never happen. And the accountability is, the benefits outweigh the costs. Plus, if my idea can so easily be stolen just by hearing about it, it probably wasn't sustainable to begin with, right? Because when I launch it, everyone would know about it anyways. We need to share ideas liberally. We need to also tune into the positive force of competition. Here's a quick story about a guy named Noah Kalina, a photographer based in Brooklyn. For whatever reason, he took a photograph of himself every single day for 5 years. And then, I don't know, one day he's surfing on a photography blog and he comes across another woman who had been doing the same thing of herself for 2 years. And she's talking about how she's going to debut it at this gallery and have this thing. And he says, no way. In a matter of a week and a half, he puts together a YouTube video, a montage of all of the photographs in succession. He gets his girlfriend at the time to make a beautiful melody, puts it up on YouTube, becomes one of the most viewed YouTube videos of all time. This becomes a platform for his career. He was on the cover of different magazines. He was on the morning shows. It was all about pacing himself with other people around him. All too often we shy away from competition because what we're doing is creative and it's unique and we don't need to think about that. It's a very powerful force tuning into competition. Two other things I found were interesting in meeting a lot of these teams. A lot of these very productive creative teams swore on the benefit of fighting. Why would fighting be something important? Well, if you think about it, when you're debating something, the outcome of something, you're pulling, the possibility towards you, your area of, your design space of solutions, your opinion, and then someone else disagrees and they're pulling it towards them. And then there's sort of like this multi-dimensional tug of war until someone says, you know what? I don't care anymore. This is just too heated for me. That's called apathy, right? And as soon as that happens, you're really hurting the user, the customer, because that design space of solutions is no longer explored by everyone else in the conversation. And so fighting apathy ruthlessly is one of the things that these teams do and these leaders do. And they actually hire people and say, listen, we fight. And when we do, we know we're onto something. Fighting is a virtue. However, you don't want to become burdened by consensus. And this is now to study this, I went to experienced design firms that did some monument memorial stuff, like they designed for very emotional experiences. Think about a September 11th memorial and all the constituents you have to please, the victims families, foundations, governments, designers, architects. I asked, how do you make sure you don't end up with something completely unremarkable? And what they said was, they try to get they go to their constituents and they say, listen, we're willing to compromise on everything except for what they called the sacred extremes. The one or two things that were truly distinguishing about the project. They would try to define those things early. They would try to gain buy-in early. They would reach out to constituents, and rather than hide them and sort of start with what everyone would agree on, they would lead with those things. They would make sure that those things, those elements were always valued. Moving on quickly to the third piece that I wanted to share with you today is about leadership capability. And I just want to say that, there's the doers, the dreamers, the incrementalists that we discussed, right? Well, there's this immune system that we need to have in a creative team in order to be productive. And like the body, where you have an immune system that kills off anything that's new, but if you ever got an organ transplant, the first thing the doctor would do is suppress your immune system so you can take on something that's new and grow with it. It's the same thing in a creative team. The doers, those doers that we discussed, those are the immune system. They have to kill off everything that's new, especially during execution phase, because that's oftentimes what gets us off track. But when you're in the brainstorm phase, that's when you're empowering the dreamers. That's the moment where you suppress the immune system and you let the dreamers thrive. This immune system where we hire people and we keep this chemistry is extremely important. Oftentimes the creatives that I meet, they don't want to hire the doers. You know, they're not fun to have a beer with. It's extremely important to have this immune system. Leaders. Leaders should talk last. A quick story about Jack Welch. I heard once that he would sometimes summon all the deputies and he would go in and say, here's what I think we should do. What do you think? You know, and oftentimes, even though some people would disagree relative to what he had said, he was failing to engage some of the newest people around the table that would otherwise maybe not speak up. And those sometimes are the people who leave their jobs saying, I didn't feel like my skills are fully utilized. It's important for us to, as creative leaders of teams, make sure that people can feel engaged. We need to buy engagement, oftentimes by asking first and speaking later. We have to find and empower the hot spots in our teams. In the Peace Corps, when they put people out in different places around the world for 2 or 3 for a couple of years, and then but they say you should make sure that your contributions outlast your stay. How do they do that? They don't go to the most senior people in the village that are concerned about, politics and whatever else. They don't go to the most popular people in the village that are concerned about being funny, and entertaining everyone. They go to the people that everyone goes to for information. And when you actually see in companies surveys where they say, who do you go to get an answer for a question you have? It looks like this. All of the sort of answers go to certain people that are not the most senior, they're not the most popular. Oftentimes they're the assistants, the people that everyone goes to, because they have the answers. We need to make sure that we empower those hotspots. And ironically, when we downsize, sometimes we fire these people. They actually play a very important role in perpetuating all these best practices. We need to hire people based on initiative rather than experience. You can have superstars in the room that have tremendous amounts of experience, but taking initiative in what's interesting to you, that's the best indicator of taking future initiative. And if you look on that interest section of someone's resume and you ask them what they did about it, that will give you an inkling that they're going to take initiative with these creative projects that take a long time to pursue. Last but not least, I was very struck by the folks that I met that had really interesting career trajectories, where they had, just somehow, some way, they were in publishing, and then 6 years ago, they were offered this fledgling job in a small unit called digital publishing. And they took the job, even though everyone said they were crazy. No one's going to ever read a book on a computer. Why would you ever do that? But somehow, some way, they knew that when they were getting doubted, that was an indication that they should gain confidence. Nothing extraordinary is ever achieved through ordinary means. Society shuns what society celebrates. And a lot of these folks said that they learned to gain confidence from being doubted. I think that's something that we should all keep in mind as we go ahead and we make our ideas happen. Thank you very much.